When I say Rob, you say Rob. Today on the ManSpace. Welcome to the ManSpace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, Spacemen. It's just me today. It's just Rob. This will be real awkward. It's due to a number of factors, travel, and I guess other factors, of which I will not name, that has prohibited us from recording quite the way we've wanted to in order to finish the way we want to finish. But I'm recording today by myself because I wanted to bring up, since we're running out of episodes, I wanted to mention a couple things that I think every man needs to do in order to continuously grow and progress and change. I'm going to share a couple of stories. It'll probably turn into more as we go that tie into these principles. Maybe one of which I just can't resist sharing. There's this window behind me, and when I was doing a virtual session, so I'm staring out the window, I watched a Cardinal couple. We'll call it that. I don't know if you know this about Cardinals, but the male is the pretty one. It's the red cardinal. The female's a brown one. And if you live in a place where there's cardinals, they always fly in little couples. It's always one male and one female hanging out together. Maybe I should look that up. Maybe cardinals mate for life. I don't know. But I'm just going to read out loud what I'm typing in. So, they do form long-term bonds. Here's what I found interesting. I was watching these cardinals outside my window today, and they're sitting on this branch, and the male would take off and he'd dive down and he'd go get something and he'd come back up. He'd go get some food and he would then feed it to the female, and then she'd eat, and then he'd go down and get some more and come back up and feed her. It was kind of a fascinating thing. I was actually talking with a client at the time who was in a relationship where all change is basically on his shoulders. She's basically said she doesn't need to change anything. It's all up to him. And it's kind of an interesting dilemma I think an increasing number of men face right now, which is women are being told consistently in social media and regular media that men are idiots, and women have to tolerate the idiocy of men, and men are just lucky to have women who are in the relationship with them and who are willing to stay. And it really bothers me because I think it's totally incorrect, and it also creates an environment where women either are able to or forced to overlook things that they also need to work on to make the relationship better. But what I thought about watching these cardinals today was thinking about this bird who, it's just in him. He's not thinking whether or not it's fair that he goes and gets food and feeds this female. It's what is in his innate nature to do, to take care of her. And I liked the idea of knowing that bird, knowing his role. I won't say his place. That sounds, I don't know, condescending or unappealing, I think, but knowing his role, that it is his role, it is part of his nature of who he is as the male bird in this dyad they have, that he will be the one who gets the food and feeds her. I don't know if it goes the other direction. There's some role that the female is going to have. I don't know what that role is because I don't study birds. Although, if you want to study birds and get into birds, I've heard that we're all going to get into birds as we get older. There's a fascinating show we've talked about on the podcast before called, now I can't even remember what it's called. It's not Birders. Birders? No. I wish I could remind. It's on YouTube. It's two brothers who decide to go try to have a big year. They get into birding. And somebody I know who listens to this I think is probably saying out loud right now what the show is called. I wish I could remember. Doesn't matter. Fashioning show. Go watch it. And you'll also feel like you're kind of into birds. And we have a lot of birds in Austin. And when I see them, I see hawks all the time. And I admit, I'm kind of like, I kind of want to get some binoculars and just stare at these birds. Anyway, I like the idea of this male knowing what his role is. And he does his role regardless of whether or not he thinks it's fair or whether or not she's appreciative or not. He just does his role. That's one story that I'm going to come back to the principle of. The next story, which I've shared bits and pieces of this over the course of the podcast. I once had a couple where the female she was very emotionally reactive, and she would bring a blanket to sessions, and during the sessions she would when things got intense emotionally, she would put the blanket on as sort of a safety blanket. And the husband tended to just kind of acquiesce to her bigger emotions. And I needed that to shift in order to get the couple moving the way they needed to move. And so I let her know, hey, I'm going to try to open your husband up a little bit. You're probably going to want to put your blanket on for this because it's going to get a little intense, potentially. It wasn't necessarily intense. He wasn't saying anything rude, but he was being more honest. And some of what he was saying was going to be a little bit painful for her to hear. So as he shared, I kind of kept opening it up and you know, I'd like to say that I once or twice checked in on her, but I may not have. I don't remember. It's been a while since this has happened. But the session ended, and I felt like it was a good session because the husband really was being more honest and expressive than he had been probably in the whole time in therapy. Then I get an email from her a couple of days later saying, essentially, Rob, you left me out in the cold. You didn't care about my feelings, about what was going on for me. You must be a sadist. And I was like, wow. I didn't think sadism was going to enter the picture, but I responded to the email and said, hey, why don't you come in and we can talk about this? Email is not really a place where therapists can go through things that we need to because it's not ethical, it's not secure, all sorts of things. So I said, why don't you come in and talk about it? So she came in and sat down with me, and I said, so you're not happy with me? And she said no. And I said, well, what's going on? What, tell me why this was happening. And she proceeded for probably the next 15 minutes to kind of describe in detail all the things that I had done wrong in therapy and why I was such a jerk in that session, at least. I don't know that she was saying this in general, but it was in that session. And I had to, I knew my job in that moment as the therapist was to think through like, okay, well, she needs to express something to me. So I had to, in order to show the empathy I needed to show, I needed to go a little deeper. So she described some things, you know, you said this or did this. I had to essentially say back like, yeah, that's going to be really isolating for you. That would have felt like this and this for you. You would have felt totally abandoned. To show her, I understood. I was trying. I wasn't just trying to show her this. I really was trying to understand like how difficult this would have been for her and how upsetting it would have been. Because I did want to, I assumed at the beginning that I didn't necessarily do something wrong, but that she was hurt, because I knew she was going to come in and tell me I did a bunch of stuff wrong. So it was my job to listen through for what her hurt was, not how I was wrong or incompetent. So as she kept talking, one of the things I tried to do was to actually say out loud, you're right. I did that wrong. Or I don't know if I said I did that wrong, but I would say, I would validate the fact that she was hurt and that I had a part in hurting her. I'm going to pause that story then and go to this. I don't know if the third one's a story, but it's something that I've thought about that I think is essential for every man as he wants to move forward in his own life, to be able to make changes and keep continually evolving into the man he wants to be, because I don't think that is a fixed state. I don't think there's a point at which it's like, there, I'm now the man I want to be. Beyond saying the man I want to be is continually working towards the man I want to be. Because as we go along, there's too much in life to understand about ourselves and about humanity that will change what we think a man needs to be, or who we want to be. I think I've mentioned this probably also on the podcast before, but I remember one time I had a friend coming into town. He came into town for a conference that we had, and we went to lunch. I picked him up from the airport. And we went to lunch, and he was asking. We were talking about, he's a professor, but also has a small private practice on the side, and he was asking, how my practice is going, and asked what I charge per hour, and then he was asking if I had the day off because I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, and I said, no, I saw clients this morning. And he started laughing, and he said, you charge that much per hour and that's what you wear to therapy? I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't think clients are paying for me to come and show up in a suit. But for him, and for most people actually, in the therapy field, the expectation is you dress business casual. For me, I don't dress like that. And I feel like when you show up to therapy with me, you're going to get me as a therapist. Part of that comes from the particular approach to therapy that I adhere to. At least one of the two foundational approaches I adhere to. One is called symbolic experiential therapy, that was started by a man named Carl Whitaker, who really believed in the tenet that you show up as a human in a room with another human, and you let that kind of build into something, and you do things in therapy consistent with who you are as a person. Some therapists have this idea in their head that's like, you're gonna leave your biases at the door. It sounds good to say that, to say I'm going to leave these at the door. It's not super realistic to think you can just drop your biases off and be different with each person you meet. I think it matters more to know what my biases are and to know how to incorporate them in a way that is helpful to clients, or I shouldn't say incorporate them, but consider them, be aware of them. What's interesting about my friend who was shocked at what I was showing up and how I was showing up in therapy was, I thought, dude, I don't want to go into the therapy office and try to be a therapist. I want to go into the therapy office and be Rob, who happens to be a therapist. And so I hope I can offer some of these clients. And for most clients, it does feel more relaxing to them to see a therapist who's a little more relaxed, so it doesn't feel like we're having a business meeting. So those three stories, the Cardinal, the lady who called Rob a sadist, and my friend at lunch with me. I thought about these elements, like when people will ask, or what we've tried to accomplish on this podcast is trying to figure out, how do we help people see how they can keep progressing forward. And in my case, what I believe most strongly is, like, how do you keep progressing forward, even if the circumstances around you aren't changing? Because sometimes our circumstances won't change. Like the person I was meeting with this morning while I was watching this Cardinal, I thought, and I actually said, I don't know that your wife will be changing anytime soon. So you would have to know that all changing that you make is because you want to be a different, better version of yourself. and that by doing so, you will be happier. I think in order for us to keep moving forward, because as we close down the podcast and move on to different things, the whole reason we did this podcast was because it did seem like men were struggling, and they still are. It's not like we've come out of it. And thank goodness for the ManSpace, because we've solved the problem. But wanting men to feel a little bit more empowered, to know that there is a community of other men who want to be better versions of themselves, and not be the things that you see on social media that are like, not necessarily we're going to fight against the toxic man, and instead we're going to be these like quote unquote alpha males, which I really can't stand the idea when people talk about alpha males. It's somehow condescending and demeaning to females, but also to males in general. I don't think it makes this idea that men, there's an ideal man out there that we're all supposed to be, and then really in the end it's probably going to be a competition for who's going to win out, and that just pits us against ourselves, which is a stupid idea, because most of us really are trying to be better versions of ourselves. So when I look at this, and when people say, when they ask like, well, how do I keep moving forward? Like when I end sessions with clients and we're done, we'll talk about, here's how you keep moving, because therapy's over, but your progression doesn't stop because therapy's over. One of the things I will mention, I don't necessarily mention this way, but these stories today thought about these, and it made me think about these in this way. One is when I mention that Cardinal, I would say it's know your role. More specifically, and this will tie into the third thing, but know your integrity. Know the things that's like, this is innate in me as a male. The definition of what's innate in a male, I guess, can vary by person, background, upbringing, culture, all sorts of things. But I think it's important to know as a male, well, for the family I grew up in, this is where the background comes in. For the family I grew up in, a male, I remember my dad when I was engaged, and there was a really bad storm coming through, and my fiance, and my now wife, was at my house with me, and my dad, I was in my parents' house because it had to do with where my fiance lived and where I was living at the time. My parents lived closer, so I was staying at their house, and my dad said, "Hey, this is your family now. You need to take care of her. So she needs to probably sleep in your bed, and you can sleep on the couch instead of her going home, because the weather's too bad." And it was kind of the first time that I remember my dad telling me, well, not that I remember him telling me, but the first time it occurred to me, it's part of my role to protect my family. I don't think it's only my role, and I don't think it's only a male's role, but it is definitely innately in me as a male to protect my family and to make that my priority. Whether it's fair or not doesn't matter. It's part of my role. And I think knowing my role and my place there makes it easier to just go do the things that I need to do and not be upset that I'm doing those things, and not feel like it's unfair, because it's just the way that it works, at least in my head. And so for that Cardinal, he went and got food. He wasn't like, well, how about you get the food today? He was just saying, yeah, I'll go get the food. That's what I do. I think it probably also helps that Cardinal probably knows what the female does for him, like whether it's grooming him or whatever it is she does. I don't know. But I think that matters to know that, like, it's easy to accept your role when you can recognize that your wife has her role as well, and to look for and see how she's doing it. The second thing I thought about was when my client came in and called me a sadist. I thought through that, and it was hard for me to think, hey, maybe I screwed this up. But I think one of the most valuable things that any human, but since we're speaking to the space-averse, as we like to call it, I guess, that any human can do is to say, hey, what am I doing that needs to shift, and how am I screwing this up? So there was a lot of things that my client said to me in that time that I thought, no, that's not right. Or she doesn't understand why I did that. And some things I explained to her, hey, I'm not sure you understand why I did that. I'm going to have to do it again. Because I needed her to understand, like, I'm not doing this to hurt you. My intention was never to hurt you, though I knew it would hurt. I think that matters with my integrity. If I go back to that first thing, my role, My role as the therapist was I have to do some things that will be painful to you, but it is never my intention to try and hurt you. I do need you to hear and feel things that will be unpleasant, because that's humanity, that's life. And that's part of being in a good relationship, is that you can have conversations that will be hard and difficult. So my role in that moment, and matching it with my integrity, was to say, this is what I'm going to have to do. But the other part of what I had to do was to say, I could be wrong here. There may be some things I can learn from this situation. In your relationship with your spouse or your work or wherever it is, if you can come in saying, I know there's some things that I did well, I know why I did the things I do because I know my role and I know my integrity, but I'm also open to hearing where I need to shift. And it doesn't mean I've failed everything and everything is my fault. Keeping that in mind, that because you need to shift doesn't mean you've done everything wrong. Even if your spouse is like, see, you ruined the marriage, it's like, no, you didn't. There's some things you need to change, though. And keeping that balance in your head that says, I need to keep growing and progressing, will actually make a huge difference in you growing and progressing. To be able to acknowledge there's always something I can hear that I need to change, and I'm open to hearing it. That becomes possible when we know who we are as individuals. That's the third thing. When I mentioned my friend at lunch, when he's like, why do you do this? It's like, because I know who I am when I go in the therapy room, and I want to make sure I know who I am. If you haven't noticed on the podcast, Matt and Mike and I are all three of us are men of faith. I actually think it is vital for every man to have a faith in something bigger than him, to have faith in God. I won't decide for any man what that faith is or what it looks like. I do think knowing the nature of my faith in God is that I have a faith in a God who is a father who knows me really well. So that means I can go to him and say, hey, help me understand myself and who I am, so that I can show up the way I need to be and the way you created me to be, rather than me showing up trying to be something that I'm not. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to progress. It's saying, let me start with the raw materials that I have. I need to show up knowing the materials that you put in here so that I can enhance those materials and keep becoming a better version of myself. And in the process of doing so, I will be adding in new materials and new ingredients that we can then make into something more down the road. There are things that I've had, experiences that I've had in my life, where I've been able to see very clearly, here are elements of what makes me me. And been able to see there are elements of what makes me me that are running at about 3% right now. And they need to be elevated up to 40 or 50 or 80%. That's one of the reasons, actually, for Matt and Mike and I, why we've decided that we're moving on from the podcast, is because I think we've kind of put out the messages we want to put out, and we want to start to try to put them out in different ways to reach more people. Because for me, at least, I can see potential that I have not tapped into. And sometimes staying in this safe position of doing something I've known and done for 5 years now, 6 years now, is going to inhibit me from actually developing the things that I need and want to develop. And not maybe, the things that God wants me to develop. So I mentioned the God thing because I think it matters for men to know who they are. And one of the ways they can know that is by asking a God, who do you understand me to be? And how can I see who I am? How can I see the elements of myself that I've not seen? One of the ways you can do that more tangibly is also to ask people around you that you love and care and trust. Who do you understand me to be? Like, how do you understand the way I function in conversations? Or what do you notice about me when we're in groups of people? Or what do you wish you saw more of from me? Those are things that's like, oh, okay, you can see these things from me. Like, it's helpful when someone says, I remember in high school being told, it was in church, and me and my friends were being too loud. And an adult pulled me aside and gave me this metaphor that I think I've mentioned on this before, the podcast, about how there's a wagon, Rob, and you're driving the wagon. You're at the head of the wagon. All the other people, they'll do what you say, but the wagon's tipped, and now the goods are all over the highway. And I remember getting lost, like, what? But I remember what stood out is that he was saying to me, Rob, your friends you have will do what you do. I don't know if that was true or not, but it helped me to see, oh, I might have a potential here to lead people in a direction if I let myself. I took that information in to say, okay, what do I do with this? That's part of what I think on the podcast, one of the things we've really tried to emphasize for men is to teach you to listen to yourself, because there are elements of truth in who you are and your personality. And I think through what you can gain in a relationship with something bigger, a spiritual relationship, a relationship of faith with God or something bigger, that says, help me see me in ways that are not always possible on our own. And I think knowing who we are and listening to ourselves, our desires, our urges, and learning to control those desires and urges helps us see who we are in a different way and know what we're bringing to the table. Know that you should not always be bringing the same things that everyone else is bringing to the table. It's a mistake many of us will make. We get caught in these loops of trying to be somebody we're not, and then we get frustrated when it feels like it's not working. And I think, yeah, well, you're not working with the right materials. You need to start with the materials you have in your bucket. So in short today, in a short, well, I don't know, it's 30 minutes of just me. And if I'm not careful, my voice becomes real monotonous. So I do a lot of this. Just kidding. The three things I would say and actually I would probably, given more time, I could go on and on about the things I think are really opening to creating a kind of life where you can continue to adapt. Because that's the key of this, is like, how do I keep changing, is being willing to adapt. The way to be willing to adapt, and maybe I'll put these in a different order, is to first know yourself and start to trust who you are as a man and as a father and as a son and as a friend, but also just your personality. Learning, for example, as I have, that for me, humor is very valuable, and it turns my brain on, and I get more productive when I use it. I also have to know my limits with it to be able to use it to its full potential. So knowing who you are, be, or two, I don't know if it was letters or numbers. Be the cardinal. Know your role, and know that role it's a good thing. It's not a fairness thing. It is your role. And sometimes that role needs defining in your relationship, to say with your spouse or your partner, like, hey, what is my role? What are the things that you see me needing to do? And even asking and looking for what their role is, but knowing your role. And then being willing, and the third thing is to be willing to adapt when someone says, hey, this isn't working, or you did this, to take accountability and say, you're right, I did that, and I think I need to change that. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person, because I already know who I am and I know my role, but this needs to be tweaked. If you can do those three things consistently, you're always going to keep adapting and evolving. And you don't leave parts of yourself behind, you just keep adding to it. It's something I've tried to work on. I try really hard to hold on to who I know myself to be. And I'm open to hearing, you need to change. It sucks sometimes. I really don't want to, and I struggle with it, but it's gotten me much further being open to it and knowing I know who I am, so it's okay if I need to change. And I know my role and my place. So, Spacemen, that's Rob's swan song, since this will be the last one you get of just me alone. And you're welcome, I guess. And then come back next time when there'll be all three of us, and catch us on the ManSpace.